Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for a season review. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by John Gibson, and we're going to do this in two parts. This is part one, and we're going to start from the summer transfer window and head all the way through to the end of the year, finishing with that defeat from Nottingham Forest at St James's Park. I'm afraid, John, we will have to talk about it later in the show. It's been an up and down campaign, some real highs, some real lows. And that's where we're going to start, John. I want you to sum up the season. And it seems a little bit daft asking this question because part one is going to go out on Thursday, part two is going to go out on Saturday. And we still won't know whether Newcastle have qualified for Europe or not. And I suspect, like a lot of people, John, your summing up, your verdict of the season might rest on Man City beating Manchester United in the FA Cup.
I think it does, because it's as simple. Having been in the top four and had the Champions League, if you follow that up and you go to seventh with all the injuries we've had, that's okay as long as you're in Europe. If you're out of Europe, it suddenly takes a different look. So the whole season will be judged on the result on Saturday afternoon. And, we've got to hope and got to believe that Manchester City are far too good for Manchester United. But yes, it does depend on that. It's been a crazy season. I mean, it's been like being on a trampoline for 9 months, isn't it? It's been up, down, up, down. We've had some marvellous, marvellous highs, like Paris Saint-Germain and the whole Champions League experience. Yes, we didn't finish where we wanted to, but it was a wonderful experience. Some very, very good matches and some unbelievable downs. It has been an up and down season. It has turned out, under the circumstances, to be not too bad. It's out of Newcastle's hands now. But if they are to have any luck, and I think they've deserved some luck over the season, then the form book will prevail on Saturday afternoon.
Fingers crossed it does. Now, I'm going to ask you, John, to go right back to the start of last season. Can you remember, because I would have asked you, I know I would have asked you, can you remember what you said about what you would have expected from Newcastle's season?
At the beginning of the season?
Yeah,
Well,
what would you have taken?
yeah, I mean, I would have taken Europe. I think we had to get into Europe, one level or the other level. I was uneasy by the transfer dealings that summer. I thought they were poor, and they got even worse in January because we did nothing at all. So, having had a wonderful start to life under new owners and new manager in the transfer market, where we bought spectacularly well, it died on us last summer, and it died on us completely in January. So, yes, I was probably hoping for more than I got because some very nervous times. But if we end up in Europe, that's acceptable.
I think I'd said top six and obviously European qualification and a good cup run with the hope of maybe even winning one. Didn't quite happen. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed it happens next season. You've mentioned there the transfer window, and I think it was a transfer window that definitely divided people. I think a lot of people, John, were in your camp. It wasn't a good enough transfer window. I was a little bit more optimistic. I looked at the signings of Sandro Tonali and Harvey Barnes, and I thought instant upgrade. Really good couple of purchases there. Yes, Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall. At the time, I thought, well, are they impact players for now or are they tomorrow's players? As the season's gone on, they've proved they are very much today's players, which is fantastic. I wasn't too disappointed at the transfer window. I think I was quite happy with it because I could see the potential of Livramento and Hall. And as I said, Tonali and Barnes, I thought were excellent buys. I was slightly disappointed that we didn't get a third striker, and the number 6 issue. I was prepared to give maybe Tonali the opportunity to see if he could handle that role. In hindsight, not getting a number 6 in the summer was probably one of the biggest mistakes they made. But out of 10, I probably rated the window a 7. You clearly weren't at that level.
No, I wasn't, because at the time it happened, of course, nobody could foresee what was going to happen with Tonali with his suspension for betting irregularities, and certainly we weren't going to know that Bonds was going to play very, very little in the whole of the campaign. So that took two big time out of it. I did query the fullback signings at the time, not because of their potential, but because of the necessity, having finished fourth top and got into the Champions League, to have impact players immediately as opposed to buying for the future, which we did with the boy we bought, excuse me, that went on loan to Feyenoord, of course. There was another that was bought very much for the future. And I was concerned because I thought we needed a six, and whether Tonali would have played as a six or played as an eight long term, we're not certain. He can play both, but we needed a six. We desperately needed a centre forward. And a right winger, probably we're still talking about needing a right winger a year on now. So I don't think we bought for positions of urgency. We bought for future positions. For example, we bought Harvey Barnes, who's effectively really an outside left when we just got Anthony Gordon. And we bought Tonali, not certain because we didn't see enough of him, where exactly we was going to play as a six or as an eight. And we were glaringly short of cover up front. So, I mean, I'm delighted at Livramento. The minute we saw him, he was looking at quality player. And I'm so pleased for Hall because he had such a tough 2/3 of the season that it's ended well for him at the end. They are good signings, but they would have been good signings now. A year ago, they were for the future, and I was delighted to get them. But I would have also liked a number six, a centre half, and a centre forward. And what would I like now? A number six, a centre half, and a centre forward.
Yeah, that was the point I was going to make, that the positions that didn't strengthen last summer are the positions that are priority this summer. And a right winger as well is something that's on the top of the list of many, many people, someone who can come in and upgrade on Jacob Murphy and Miguel Almiron. Moussa Diaby was the one that was strongly linked, and he ended up at Aston Villa and has finished the season really strongly. And again, as I say, that's probably a priority for many people going into this summer. Exits, John. Chris Wood's deal at Nottingham Forest became permanent. What a season he's had. Again, in hindsight, it's one where you might question. I don't think anyone predicted. I think it's 13 or 14 goals he's had. 14 goals he scored this season. Caldolo left to go to Leeds. But the big one, Alan St. Maximin leaving to go to Saudi Arabia. Again, we talk about people or decisions that divide the fan base, and this was one. And I think a lot of people were upset that he left. I was in the camp that I thought it was the right time. He frustrated me. He was great at watching flashes, but that's all there ever was. There wasn't any end product. I thought it was only in the months prior to his exit that he started making the right decisions with the ball, but he also had injury issues. I wasn't too disappointed to see him go. And I think, if anything, John, the real disappointment came at the price tag, because we'd seen Ruben Neves go for goodness knows how much, and we'd seen Alan St. Maximin end up going for just, I think it was 20 plus million. What did you make of St. Maximin's exit? Because a lot of people questioned whether Newcastle had the players to replace him in Harvey Barnes, in Anthony Gordon. And again, we're talking about that viewpoint in the summer, and we're now answering it after a season where we can say Anthony Gordon is definitely the man to replace Alan St. Maximin. But at the time, John, were you a little bit concerned?
No. I was a little bit concerned that Anthony Gordon would live up to his expectations, because he'd had a bad end to the previous season, but he was truly magnificent. No, I think Maxi was and still is and always will be a show pony. He is lovely. If you're a mid-table side looking for a bit of inspiration and give the fans a little bit of stardust, then Maxi's the man for you. If you're going to be a top four side and you're going to carry on and go to win trophies, then Maxi isn't for you. And having sat for a season in the press box next to Malcolm McDonald and having my ears bashed about what a show pony Maxi was and how frustrating he was for a centre forward, Super Mac known all about that, because he would show to cross the ball, then pull it back on his other foot and in out, shake it all about for the centre forward. Didn't know when to go and when not. So no, if we have to cash in at this current moment in time, cash in on some first teamer to be able to make leeway for us to sign better players, then Maxi was the right person to cash in then, as is, in my opinion, Almiron and Wilson now, and not Bruno and Isaac and Gordon. They must stay, but if you've got to get rid of somebody on the wage bill and also to get a few quid in and to help fair play, then Almiron and Wilson is now, and Maxi was then. So I think that was good business.
We're going to get into August now, the start of the season. But before we do, we'll just take a quick break for some adverts. They may appear, they may not appear. We don't know. We just put them in and the company decides whether they'll pay for the adverts. But here we go, and we'll be back after these messages. Right, on to August then, John. And Newcastle went unbeaten in pre-season, finishing with a 4-0 win over Villarreal, and then started the season with a 5-1 thumping of Aston Villa. My Villa supporting father-in-law was not very happy at all. Goals from Isaac, who got 2, Harvey Barnes got 1, Tonali and Wilson got the others. Absolutely fantastic start of the season, and it really whet the appetite for what was to come. And yeah, just a brilliant start to the campaign.
Yes, it was. Ironic, isn't it, to think that we were watching the side that was going to take our top 4 position. We had just finished top 4, and who's come out the blue to finish top 4 this season? Aston Villa, and who beat them home and away? Newcastle United. They looked a better side than 5-1 on the day. I thought they rather stacked their hand at something like 3-1. But in the first half, when they'd equalised and that, they looked a half-decent side. We looked a terrific side, and having finished 4th top and made the Champions League, it looked as if we're in for a season of roses with not many downs and plenty ups. And as an introduction from Tonali, sensational, because it took them all of 6 minutes to score. And open the floodgates for a 5-1, which in hindsight, when I looked at the whole season, was one of our great matches of the season. There was better, Paris Saint-Germain, of course, but it was one of our great matches of the season. It was a wonderful start. We started immediately. You had Isaac scoring 2, so he really set the tone for what was going to be a wonderful season for him. And we had 4 different goal scorers. And you know what I've found fascinating as the season's gone on, Andrew, is that when I talk to any football hacks or fans elsewhere in the country, not from Newcastle, but elsewhere in the country, and we talk about what we need and don't need in the transfer market, we always say, and we know why we say it, that we need a centre forward. We say it because we've only got Isaac, and Wilson is very fragile, and we don't have a centre forward, and we've had to play with a false 9 on a few occasions. Outsiders don't get that. Outsiders say, Gibbo, wait a minute. You keep banging on about needing a centre forward. You topped 100 goals in all competitions this season. You topped 80 goals in the Premier League. Both are records for Newcastle United. They topped 100, first time in 63 years in the top flight. We topped 85, which is our best ever Premier League season. So, you know, why do you need a centre forward? You've got a centre forward that scored 25 goals. Isaac, you had 3 people in double figures, Isaac, Gordon and Wilson. Longstaff got 8 and Bruno 7 from midfield. Barnes got 5 in virtually no games at all, which indicates he's going to be a good goal scorer. You say, why? It isn't as simple as that, though, and we know it. All those other players are either goal-scoring wingers or attacking midfielders. We only have Wilson as backup to Isaac, and Wilson is no guarantee of anything. He's a guarantee of goals, I guess, if he plays, but he's not a guarantee of anything. So, yes, we do need a centre-forward big time. But I must admit, Andrew, everybody I talk to who's from outside the area scratches their head when I say we need a centre forward. To say, Gibbo, you scored 100 goals, you scored 85 in the Premier League, and you're banging on about needing a centre forward. But I think we do.
Yeah, I think Callum Wilson looking likely to leave. But that game against Aston Villa, it really set the tone for, I think, Newcastle's home form, which is the only thing that's really saved them this season, because if they'd earned the same amount of points that they did it on the road at home, then there'd be in a bit of bother. And it showed you, like, good teams come to Newcastle, come to St James's Park, and they don't have it easy. And it's a bad place to come for most teams in the Premier League, because I remember that game, everyone was absolutely buzzing about Aston Villa. They were talking them up. I mean, they've reached the position that most were talking them up to, but they were talking them up as the next big thing, and they're going to disrupt the establishment. And Newcastle just blew them away, and it was absolutely fantastic to see.
And of course, it set the tone, Andrew, for the goal scoring that I've just talked about, getting 100 and getting 85. We scored 5 on the opening day. And I, not just with hindsight, but I felt on that day they looked a much more dangerous side than 5-1 made them look at the end of the day. I watched them in the first half and I thought, these are tasty. And so it proved, although not against us, because we then went and smacked them, what was it, 3-1 at their place, which we'll get on to later when we do the second half of the season. But it was a terrific start for us. It was particularly pleasing for me, and probably for you and every Geordie, because the manager was Emery, who had turned down us and to go to Aston Villa. So it was nice to see his bottom smacked on the opening day. But, I mean, and as you say, I thought 5-1 against Villa, who have been really talked up. Fergie was talking about them being a side for the Champions League after losing 5-1 to us. And by the way, he's been proved right, because whether we like it or not, they have made the Champions League. But having finished in the top 4 and won the opening day 5-1, when new £52 million striker scores in 6 minutes, it looked, hurrah, this is the wonderful season we were all hoping for. What did we do? We lost the next 3, which rather brings us down to earth and rather set, if the 5 goals at home set us up for the fact that we're going to score a pile of goals this season, to win 5 and then lose the next 3, albeit we played Man City and Liverpool in that, but to lose the next 3 indicates what this season was going to be, which was up and down.
Yeah, I think the one negative I took away from that Villa performance was that you could see the gaps were there, and these are the gaps that have hit Newcastle throughout the entirety of the season, where it's just been too easy and the midfield's been bypassed. And on that day, they were fortunate that they scored 5, and no one remembers, the gaps being there. But I remember coming home and thinking, great performance, fantastic start of the season. But, other teams, maybe even Aston Villa, had they not been rocked by losing Tyrone Mings, to that injury, which he's kept out all season, will exploit those gaps. And as the season's gone on, we've seen Newcastle susceptible to that. But yeah, you mentioned the next 3, the Man City game, John. I just thought it was kind of Newcastle were kind of content. They were just a bit blasé. They didn't do anything. I didn't really understand the plan. I felt if
I
they pushed
think
Man City,
they were just determined, Andrew, not to get really turned over.
yeah,
And they tried to contain, and we lost 1-0. And, people say if you've got to lose 1-0 away to City, you certainly haven't been humiliated. What you're saying and what Geordie said that day is that we lacked ambition. If we'd shown more ambition, we could have got a positive result out of it. Of course, there would be people who would argue if we'd shown more ambition, we would have lost by more than 1-0.
yeah. You can never win, can you? And then Liverpool at home 2-1, and the
That was, I was furious.
So
That was awful.
Newcastle 1-0 leading, Liverpool down to 10 men from the 28th minute, and then Newcastle concede in the 81st and 93rd minute. And I think when you look back on the season, John, that result and that second half performance kind of just sums up Newcastle United this season, where there's been a lack of discipline. I think there's sometimes have looked very disorganised, and it's cost them. And we can point to 5 or 6 games where the result should have been very different, and Newcastle have only got themselves to blame for not picking up maximum points. Everton, for example, get on to in the second half of the show. But yeah, such a frustrating result, because win that, and you that the month looks a lot better. You picked up 2 wins from your first 3, but to lose it in such a fashion when you shouldn't have lost it, you had the man advantage. I don't think it
I
was any
mean, we
surprise that they went on to lose to Brighton the week after.
we were 1-0 up with 10 minutes to go, 11 against 10. Van Dijk, their great organiser at the back, had been sent off. We were 11 against 10, 1-0 ahead with 10 minutes to go, and at home. There's no way you lose those games. It ought not to happen. Nunes come on as a sub and scored both the goals. I mean, when he equalised, I was absolutely furious, because I'm thinking this is a nonsense. And then in the 93rd minute, he scores the winner. And, if we set the tone as a goal scoring side by getting 5 on the opening day, Liverpool set the tone up here for what they did all season, which was win matches late on. How many times did Liverpool win matches at the death in the season that's just ended before they imploded a little bit right on the run in? But I mean, they set the tone in that game as well. And Liverpool infuriated me because they had a habit of doing all this sort of nonsense against us and completing the double against us. And, on Isaac's debut at Anfield, when they scored a 98th minute winner or whatever after Isaac had a wonderful second goal choked off. But yes, that was a really, really annoying and frustrating result. But you've got to say, as much self-inflicted as it was inflicted by Liverpool. Because if you're 1-0 up with 10 minutes to go and 11 men against 10, you don't lose. We did.
I think it was one of those first real moments when people questioned Eddie Howe, and they said, "Look, he's got that wrong there." And that hasn't happened often. It hasn't happened often since that Liverpool game, but it was one of those where I think the criticism was spot on. The manager got it wrong in terms of what he did to handle the fact he had a man advantage. And Newcastle should have gone for the jugular. They didn't. And as soon as Nunes got that equaliser, John, I turned to the chap beside me and said, "They're winning this," because there was just something in the air. Very, very frustrating. They go on to Brighton. They lose 3-1. Ferguson hat-trick. A game littered with mistakes, but Brighton just played them off the park. And we're talking about setting the tone, when it really set the tone for Newcastle's away form, I thought, for the rest of the season.
Yes, I'm afraid it did. And Ferguson got a lot of accolades, and he was being put forward very much as the young centre forward, the new sensation, etc. He's disappeared somewhat off the radar at the end of the season because of injuries, etc. But while he looked a good finisher and an English type, a British type of finisher, I know he's from Republic. But we played into his hands. We made it quite easy for the young man. And yes, we were second best in a 2-horse race. There's absolutely no question about that. At the end of that, having had the wonderful start, we were 14th in the table when we lost to Brighton. But this season has gone up and down, it's been a trampoline season. What happens? We beat Villa, wonderful. We then have 3 bad results, diabolical. We then go on an unbeaten run. So it was a yo-yo all season, because we then went on and played Brentford at home and squeezed past them 1-0, and then entered the Champions League, which is what this season initially was all about. We'd waited for so long, since the old days when we played in the Champions League, and then way back, and we had the wonderful nights against Barca and against Juventus and etc. And all of a sudden they were back. And for us, this was extra special. We weren't lucky. We're in the group of death because it was tough. Every side in there was tough. And yes, it turned out to be a group of death because we died and we finished bottom of it. But I think we were unlucky. I think that over the full campaign in the Champions League, I mean, on the last day of the Champions League, and we'll get to it, we could have finished in the Champions League, in the Europa Cup, but we finished out of everything. And that happened all in 90 minutes in a match. And I think we deserved more over the Champions League campaign than we got, but it did provide the most wonderful moment of our season, which we will be coming to when we play Paris Saint Germain. But we started fine. You know, to go to AC Milan and get a 0-0 draw, it wasn't the most exciting performance. And there was people that tried to say, well, was it a bit of a performance like we put on a Man City when we weren't ambitious enough against highly rated opposition? Could we have done a bit more in the game? Hey, if you go to AC Milan on your first Champions League match for 20 odd years or whatever it was, and come away with a draw, you've got every right with your home games to come to think that's a decent start to our campaign.
Yeah, it was a great start to the campaign. I thought, loads of elements to why Newcastle just didn't go for it, like you say, first time in 21 years, and you're just trying to find their feet in the competition and to pick up a point in an arena like the San Siro. Absolutely brilliant. And for me, John, I think there's an argument to say September was maybe the best month of the campaign. As you said, they're 1-0 against Brentford, thrash Sheffield United 8-0. You beat Burnley 2-0. You beat Man City 1-0 in the cup, and then that 0-0 draw at the San Siro. So, September really, really key. Part of a 7-game unbeaten run after the disappointing start. And you look at it, I mean, we all hoped, didn't we, with that Sheffield United win, that Newcastle United would go on and have no issues on the road, because it was a fantastic performance by Newcastle United. I know it was against arguably one of the worst sides we've ever seen in the Premier League, but still, to put 8 past Sheffield United was something special.
Oh, the scoreline was staggering. I mean, honestly, Sheffield United were embarrassing all season, and so we beat them 5 up here. So you've got to say that we were thoroughly expecting to beat Sheffield United, but not by 8. And we set something of a record because it was 8 different goal scorers. When you take the goalkeeper out of that, I want to know what happened to the 2 blokes who didn't score because they weren't pulling their weight. Because it's incredible to think we had 8 different goal scorers, and even more incredible, Andrew, when you realise that we ended up with Isak with 25 goals in all competitions for the season, and it took him to the 87th minute and the 8th goal for him to score, which is quite quite incredible under the circumstances. But yes, that was a super result. As you say, we played Manchester City in the League Cup, and all right, they made a few changes, etc., 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 and it was at St James's, but we beat them. And you know what? We're talking about recording this when we are on. We hope Manchester City do us a favour in the FA Cup final, and by Jove, we do hope that. But the only reason they're not going for a domestic treble is because we knocked them out in the League Cup. They're going for their second successive double of the league in the FA Cup. But the only reason they're not going for a treble is that 1-0 result that we got against them in the League Cup. And, terrific. Yes, as you say, a very, very good month.
I think that performance against City was one of my favourite games of the season. You got Kraft and Paul Dummett at the back, and they performed so well, and they outperformed a Man City side who, yes, made loads of changes, but don't take anything away from Newcastle United. It's still a very strong Man City side, and it was a brilliant night for Newcastle United, and it really just, I think, strengthens the case to why September probably is, for me, the best month of the campaign. And then I suppose 2 negatives, though, from that month, John. Harvey Barnes picks up this weird foot injury, which keeps him out for the majority of the season. Sven Botman is also injured against Sheffield United, and he's out for 3 months. And I mean, look, we had no idea what was to come, John, but it turns out it was the start of what was perhaps the worst injury crisis Newcastle United have ever had in the Premier League. That game, you see Barnes come on, make an impact, and then he has this injury, and you just think, what on earth? What on earth has gone on? Because no one foresaw the fact that you'd be out for, what was it, till February, something like that.
And I mean, what was underneath his toe or something? I
Yeah,
mean, not only did we get injuries all the season, but I mean, Anderson with the back injury, we're not certain where that came about, etc., etc. The business with uh, Harvey Barnes' toe, and this was a guy that scores lots of goals coming in off the wing and is a good finisher, and therefore we were pleased to see him arrive here. Maybe he's a bit. Eyebrow raising, having just signed Anthony Gordon, who by now has shown us all what a player that he was. Um, and thank goodness for Anthony Gordon, because right until the end of the season, he was only. I mean, I look. We had so many injuries, Andrew. I like now, and it's much easier to count the blokes that managed to stand upright all season. People like Gordon right until the death, people like Bruno, people like Shaw until very late in the season, who managed to actually play a decent number of games because, I mean, people were falling like flies. And you know, we started there with Botman, and that was very badly handled. Whether it was badly handled by Botman himself insisting he didn't want an operation, or the medical staff not pressing him enough and saying, sorry, you're going to have one, whether you like it or not. And we had that with Harvey Barnes. Willock disappeared down the plug hole, resurfaced for a very short time, and then collapsed off again. And we just had it. And then Pope, what you know, he disappeared for so long. And I think that was Joe Linton, of course, but I think Pope was hugely significant because Dubrovka, bless him, is nowhere near what Pope is, and Pope effectively was out for the rest of the season. He didn't play again to the last game once he went missing. So it was an incredible injury list that we suffered from, and something that will quietly be addressed in house this summer, because we have got to look at it and make certain that none of it was our fault, our being the club, because is it freakish? If it's freakish, good, because it's not going to be freakish again next season and the season after. It doesn't happen that often. But if it's anything to do with the medical side or the training side, that has got to be established and eliminated, because it's crippled us this season and we can't afford it to cripple us next season. No chance.
Yeah, Barnes actually started the game against Sheffield United and lasted 12 minutes. And I think interesting what you say there, because I do think the large share of the injuries were freak injuries. I mean, Dan Burn getting wiped out by Joe Linton, no one could have predicted that. This strange injury Barnes got by effectively kicking the ball. You know, we've had a couple of dislocated shoulders. Okay, the second time Murphy got injured, that was probably a mistake from Newcastle's part. You know, bringing him on when he hadn't really recovered in the mind of some. But yeah, Elliot Anderson, another absolute freak injury as well. So it's kind of a bit of both. But we go into October, John. Willock first appears in October because he's been out from the end of last season. He picked up a hamstring injury, didn't he, against... It was a sunny day at St James's Park. Was it against Leicester, maybe? Anyway, he picked up some sort of hamstring injury and was out until October. Elliot Anderson gets injured in October and misses the next 25 games. Murphy injures his shoulder, dislocates it against Dortmund at home. So already the injuries are rolling in October. And Newcastle, though, not a bad month for them. You've got West Ham away 2-2. I mean, look, they were ahead in that game. They should not have dropped the point. They did. Disappointing to see them throw that away. We get a Crystal Palace in the Premier League, and they are thumped 4-0. Poor Roy Hodgson. A great performance by Newcastle, though. And then another disappointing 2-2 draw on the road to Wolves again. Newcastle really shouldn't be throwing points away, with all due respect to Wolves. But forget all that, John, because the game we really want to talk about is the Champions League victory over Paris Saint-Germain 4-1. Miguel Almiron, Sean Longstaff, Dan Burn, and Fabian Schär. What a night. Everything was absolutely perfect. Everything. And that is a game that will stay with me for the rest of the time.
Yes, there's no question about that. It is up there. I mean, even when I delve into my memories of the Champions League with Newcastle United and my memories of Europe with Newcastle United, not just the Champions League. I mean, for me, three games stand out in Europe, and I've been lucky enough to see all the European games have all come in my time, starting back in our first season, 1968-69. Um, and three games stand out for me way above any others. That is Uzbek Doza in Budapest, because that's when it was won rather than the first leg. Yes, the 3-0 scoreline made it, but the actual trophy was lifted in Budapest. The Barcelona 3-2 here when Tino scored a hat trick in this. That's my three nights. And I will argue for dripping emotion and for what it actually was, that this was it was certainly as good as the other two and possibly better than either of them, and I include Uzbek. It's not better in terms of end product. Crikey me, we won our one and only European trophy. But in terms of the elation, in terms of the opposition, in terms of the night of dripping romance that it was, because these were the new aristocrats. I mean, we've had the Champions League dominated by the two Spanish sides, if you like, Real Madrid, whose history is sensational, and Barcelona, the modern Barcelona, Messi, etc., etc. They've dominated the landscape. But Paris Saint-Germain, with the money they take over, like they take over at Man City and now at Newcastle, their money, and they've been expected to win a European trophy. And yes, they've made a final, but that's all. They haven't won a trophy, but they are the aristocrats. And we look at the team, and with Ronaldo and with Messi on the wrong side of the hill, they had the best player in the world. It was said in Mbappe, and they came here and we absolutely blew them away 4-1. And the atmosphere was sensational. It was tingling. Even an old hack like me that's travelled the World Cup and the World Cup finals and seen all the great Newcastle games in Europe, that was an extra, extra special night. And the performance was just outstanding. And, we talk about being a side that scored goals all season, and we have been, and here was another four. But look at the goal scorers, not the regular ones. Almiron, he doesn't score all the time. Big Dan Burns, centre half, scores. Longstaff scores, and Shaw, another centre half, scores. So it wasn't the usual. It wasn't Wilson, and it wasn't Isaac, and it wasn't Anthony Gordon, and I mean the four scorers raise the eyebrow a little bit on that night. With hindsight, looking back, you say, crikey me. And, I mean, Big Dan Burn on his goal, which took about 10 minutes to make certain something hadn't happened. I thought he was going to take everybody into the back of the net with him, the defenders and whatever. He was so powerful and wanted it so badly. But I mean, Longstaff's goal, Shaw's immaculate goal right at the end, the whole night was absolutely perfect. When they'd pulled one back, they looked as if they might just flicker into life, because good sides are always dangerous, and sides with full of if stars are always dangerous. But we beat them 4-1, and then, and I know we'll get to it eventually, just to prove it wasn't a fluke in the return, we beat them 1-0 as far as I'm concerned, because a penalty after 90 minutes for a ball that ran down Tino's arm, he didn't handball it, it ran down his arm, was an absolute disgrace. And it took that for them to rescue a 1-1 draw, else we would have had the double against Paris Saint-Germain. The same Paris Saint-Germain side that went to the semi-finals of the Champions League and played Borussia Dortmund, which shows we were in a league of death, because the two sides that got out of our group actually went into and played each other in the semi-final of the Champions League. So it shows what a heck of a group we were in. And I think we were very unlucky, because we ought to have beaten Paris Saint-Germain in the return. we could have easily beaten AC Milan on the last day when the game totally at St James's ran away from us, etc., etc. Dortmund looked a good side. They were streetwise. I think they were streetwise and we were naive. I think if I looked at our Champions League and had a look at who was who and what was what, Dortmund were European streetwise. We were European naive. Um, a lot of flair, a lot of desire, a lot of passion on the terraces, but a bit naive. Dortmund were been round the block a few times and handled it very, very well. But fabulous campaign and the game of the season by a million miles, not just in Europe, of the season. Paris Saint-Germain at home 4-1.
Couldn't have put it better myself, John. Yeah, the game of the season. I say that's going to stay with me for a very, very long time. And just a quick word for War Flags, because we haven't mentioned them yet, but they really set the tone with their display that evening. You could just see that. I think the PSG players, for all they've played in big arenas, and their own home ground is a massive, massive arena. You know, it's a fierce place to go. They looked shell shocked when they walked in. I think they thoroughly underestimated not just Newcastle United as a squad and as a team, but as a fan base and as a city. They know St James's Park was something special with that display, and every tackle cheered, every pass cheered. It was amazing. We talk about the 12th man, and sometimes it's overused. It's a bit of a cliche, but it was right there. If you could bottle what the fans give the players, you'd be a very, very rich man. And it was great as well walking up to the ground, because I followed the ultras through past the monument and up to the stadium. You know, I wanted to experience that, and it was boisterous. It was loud. There were flares. They didn't like getting filmed by the press, and you know, but it was all good natured, really. But it was something special to walk up with them and just experience it, because you know we've waited for the Champions League to return for 21 years, and you wait for the football, you wait for the anthem, John, but you wait for those experiences as well. You know, it's about the collective experience, and it was absolutely fantastic to see. What was your initial feeling when you heard that anthem ring out over St James's Park for the first time? Well, first time in 21 years.
Yeah, first and foremost, relief that it was back. I mean, I've watched it so much on television with the anthem and felt we ought to be part of that. Why are we not part of that? We are a big club, and I'm just checking with myself. No, not just in my mind, not just in Geordie minds. We are a big club, and here we were back in that. And the combination of the anthem and the war flags and the Geordies buying into both made the night absolutely superb. It was one of those where you had two feelings at kickoff. One was we can't be beaten, we're invincible tonight because the mood's been set, the Geordie mood. And then the other side of it is, can we live up to all the hype? Now we've actually got to start playing, and we've got to beat the side in front of us who have the pedigree as good as anything anywhere in Europe. And so there was that dual feeling, but it didn't take us long to realize that we were going to live up to it and going to be better than it. And it was almost like, you know, demanding the waves to stop rolling over them. And in the end, they just looked to me as if they were just overawed by it and going to accept it and say, oh, it's one of those nights. Let's get the final whistle played and get the hell out of here and get back home. They weren't able to handle it. And I've never seen a world-class player do so little as Mbappe did. I've seen some world-class players have average games. I always remember Johnny Rep playing for Bastia against us in Europe on the island of Corsica, and he was so average, a Dutch international, wonderful, wonderful player. He was so average that Tommy Craig come out and said afterwards, I've never seen a world-class player do so little. And he come to St James's Park, and I think he scored a hat-trick or something and ripped us apart. But Mbappe didn't do that in the return in Paris to us. And he didn't look anything like the player that he was. And if I'm brutally truthful, and I don't care because I only care about Newcastle United, I think this season he's gone through the motions waiting for his transfer uh, into Spain,
Yeah.
and it's come about. And to be truthful, he hasn't stirred the body too greatly this season. He's waited for his transfer.
Mm.
Awful, diabolical, but it's the way it is. And you know what? When you get a big club like Paris Saint Germain that have suddenly become rich, if you don't do it the right way, and we have so far, you know what? You can buy all the good players in the world, but you know what you do? You don't get team spirit. And they had no team spirit. And we have got an abundance of that. In fact, in our bad moments, it's kept us going this season. It's kept us going when results have dipped and that we've come back the next time because the camaraderie, the team spirit is huge. And it was never shown more than it was shown against Paris Saint Germain. They don't have that. They've bought individuals, but they don't make a team. They don't buy into each other. They look as if they buy into their wage packet. They don't buy into the project. We have bought into the project.
Yeah, no arguments there. I think what just reaffirmed what a fantastic performance it was by Newcastle United was the one or two moments, the goal aside that PSG scored, was you watched them and how quick they moved the ball, and like it was just in a split second, and you could see they were a very, very good side. You could see they were a better side than Newcastle United with the quality that they've got. Obviously, on the night Newcastle put them to the sword, but it just reaffirmed watching a few of those moments, the few chances that they did get the better of Newcastle, just to pass it around and how quick it was going, just how well Newcastle performed, and what a fantastic evening it really, really was. On the Wolves, as we said, they dropped the lead to Wolves, which was very disappointing. Then it's a defeat to Dortmund at home, and Newcastle hit the bar twice. And at the end of the game, Borussia Dortmund actually tweet a picture out of the goalpost at the Gallagher end with a thank you. And that, for me, just summed up how fortunate Dortmund were to be leaving St James's Park with all 3 points.
Yeah, I think you can always say that, especially when you hit the woodwork. But I think when we look back, Andrew, over the whole campaign of the group, of our group, the group of death, and not just that match or the return in Dortmund or whatever, they handled the whole thing superbly well. Then the final, for goodness sakes, that's how well they've handled the campaign in the Champions League. Uh, they look the best side in our group. I sat with next to Malcolm McDonald, and I've been with him, as you know, you saw us at the Paris Saint Germain game, etc., etc. We sat together at Dortmund, and even though we did what we did against Dortmund at home and could have easily won, although I've always maintained that hitting the bar is bad shooting, not good shooting. Say, oh, we should have won. We hit the bar twice. Well, you shouldn't hit the bar twice. You should have gone under the bar or inside the post. It's not always a sign of good play. But I thought they were very streetwise over the whole of the campaign, including the semi win over Paris Saint Germain. And I thought they were a clever, astute side. They are what I want us to very quickly become, streetwise in the big arenas. And we will. We're on a learning curve. It takes time. We've probably done it all the wrong way around, Andrew. If we'd finished seventh and got into the conference in our first season, then fourth and got in the Champions League, we would be gurgling about the progress made, but we did it the other way around. And that's fine, as long as we step. I do believe this season's another brick in the wall, but it only is if we step forward significantly next season, and that depends on the transfer market being a better place this year than it was last summer, even though we got very unlucky with Tonali and Harvey Barnes.
But I mean, for all they were streetwise, John, I mean, Newcastle had their chances to win the game. I mean, the game was very end to end. Both keepers were kept very, very busy. But, Gregor Kobel in the Dortmund goal saved twice from Anthony Gordon, saved one from Callum Wilson, which you would have bet your house on him scoring. It was a great save, but really Wilson should have put it away. We've mentioned the two efforts that came back off the woodwork, but Pope also very, very busy. And it was just one of those nights where you can't help but think, what if? Because if Newcastle win that, they go through to the next stage, in my opinion. Dortmund were bottom of the group. It's amazing how things turn around. But I really felt Newcastle in that game, even though they lost, showed they could handle themselves against Europe's best sides, which actually in turn made the performances and results that came in November against Dortmund away, and then the AC Milan performance, which might have actually been in December. But the next two games in the group, the PSG away aside, but the games against AC Milan and Dortmund specifically, big frustration because I felt Newcastle didn't really give the best account of themselves.
No, no, that's why I've said that I think we were better in the group than if you just go into the record books and look at the group and we're bottom of the league. When we lost at home to AC Milan 2-1, I mean, we were actually in three positions during that game, knowing what was happening in the other game. We were in the Champions League knockout stages, then we were in the Europa League, and then we were out of Europe completely. I mean, we were naive. I mean, for that to happen, it's all right us saying we did well and we're frustrated and we hit the woodwork twice against Dortmund and we got beaten in the return in Dortmund. We were very unlucky in Paris Saint-Germain because the referee took 2 points off us, not Paris Saint-Germain depriving us of them. But when I say naive, it's not meant as a huge criticism. It is meant that we're not used to Champions League. In Champions League's a different ball game. You're not playing Luton or Nottingham Forest, and we didn't handle those games too well. But we're playing the cream of Europe, and I thought we were enthusiastic. We showed ability. We showed a lot of pluses in Europe, but we were naive, and we were naive in the two defeats with Dortmund and to lose at home to AC Milan. We were really naive that night. But that is not meant as a big criticism. It's a learning curve. I would have been surprised if we weren't. We could have got a better group, a slightly easier group. We would have qualified then. I think there's no question about that. We would have qualified then.
Yeah, and like I said, I got the games a little bit mixed up. Obviously, AC Milan was the last game of the group, and that was in December. We had Dortmund and PSG away in November, and that's where we'll head into November. Willock injured, out for 3 months. Longstaff injured, misses 4 games. We start with a 3-0 win over Man United at Old Trafford in the League Cup. Again, Kraft and Dummett, absolutely brilliant. And they blew Manchester United away that night. Another game that'll last long in the memory. You've got a great win over Arsenal, John. The controversial was it out of play or not goal. Joe Willock keeping the ball in before Gordon putting it home. And there was also a shout for a Joe Linton foul on Gabriel, but I've just got written down here. Who cares? It counts. A really polished performance from Newcastle, though. I mean, despite all the controversies, it was a really good outing for Newcastle against Arsenal.
Oh, I thought it was a great performance and a great result. And I loved seeing Mikel Arteta whining about the goal at the end of the game because he's good at that. If things don't, he's a good coach, don't get me wrong, but if things don't go his way, he off whinges, and he wins that day. And by the way, there was 3 checks on 3. I forget what it was, the ball out, a foul. There was 3. I mean, we stood there. I could have gone and got a mince pie and a cup of tea while we waited.
There was an offside as well. That was the other one.
I mean, while they waited for all 3 decisions to be made, I could have had a mince pie and a cup of tea. It took that long. But when I saw the 3, I thought all the 3 were okay. Again, like your father-in-law didn't like the 5-1. My brother-in-law didn't like the fact that we lost Arsenal because he's a gooner. But hard lines, and it might have cost them the championship. They think, well, hard lines again. I thought it was a good performance. I thought the goal deserved to stand. VAR had a 3-way check, and each one was cleared. And get on with it. I mean, can we make a point, Mr. Arteta, that how many goals did you score in that game? Oh, none. Well, that's why you didn't win. So, I was well chuffed with that result.
It was their first defeat of the season. I'm just reading the match report here from the BBC, and it talks about it being a lack of quality. But from Newcastle point of view, uh, it was the perfect game plan because they just disrupted Arsenal. They frustrated them. They were organised, and Arsenal just couldn't handle it. There were obviously a couple of dodgy decisions aside from the goal from an Arsenal point of view. I mean, it was a perfect decision from a Newcastle point of view, but Havertz on Longstaff, that should have been a red card. I do think Bruno was very lucky not to be sent off for a swing at Jorginho. It just had the game had everything really. A proper bit of bite, dodgy decisions. It was a real nasty, nasty game. And then Arteta blowing a gasket at the end of the game. A really entertaining game, even if it did lack a little bit of quality. But again, it showed Newcastle at home, forced to be reckoned with. Comes on the back of that League Cup victory over Manchester United. Fantastic. Though then it set them up for Dortmund, really. And you were looking at it and thinking, Newcastle going to this in decent form, beating Arsenal, best side in England at that time. They were, going for I think they were top, unbeaten, as I said there, until they ended up at St James's Park to lose. You went to Dortmund, who, if I remember correctly, weren't coming into this game in the best of form. I think they just lost the game prior, and there were questions over the manager. And I was fully expecting Newcastle to beat Dortmund in Dortmund, but they just seemed to, don't know what it was. They seemed to lack a little bit of belief. I think Jacob Murphy went off very early on, so that probably didn't help. Lewis Hall, who was substituted at half time, and he was exploited quite a bit by the Dortmund attackers. But for me, John, I think if Newcastle United could have matched the atmosphere and the belief that was in the town square during the day, I was there. It was absolutely fantastic. And I talk about PSG staying with me for a lifetime. That day, that afternoon will stay with me just as long because it was just the biggest party you will ever see. And I suppose on one hand, John, some might argue, well, is it a little bit of a small club mentality? I would argue, look, it's the first time we're back in more than 2 decades. We've got to kind of get it out of our system, and a bit like the League Cup, that night in Trafalgar Square. Did it kind of?
Geordies always know how to party. We don't need
Yeah.
a reason because we partied at the League Cup and got beat. We partied in Dortmund and got beat. We partied against Paris Saint-Germain here and won spectacularly. But we party sometimes just in case we get beat.
Why not? Everyone loves a party.
We party before the game, and I guess I'm just long toothed because I've been in the game so long and I've followed Newcastle for so long. And sometimes I try to take off my bias hat, which I never manage to do because it keeps slipping back on. But I try to take it off and sometimes just say, well, our opposition are better than us. And by the way, Dortmund's just about to play at Wembley in the final of the Champions League. So perhaps, just perhaps, they're better than us, If we were unlucky to lose the first game, you thought we should have done better. In the second game, we lost both. They're in the final. Perhaps they're slightly better than us.
No, I agree.
At this moment in time, they're better than us.
But
we sometimes have got to face the fact and say, hey, that is a fact.
No, I agree. But I do look back on that game in Dortmund with a slight frustration because Newcastle, for me, just sat back. They lacked quality when they did manage to get on the ball. Joe Linton had the chance. I mean, if Joe Linton scores with that header, and I'm not really sure how he misses, I think it's a totally different result. And it is one of those because you can look at the PSG game and the handball, that's out of Newcastle's control. But in Dortmund, I just felt a little bit like the Man City game at the start of the season. Just push, just do something because I didn't think Dortmund were all that special. They managed the game very well, but one goal I felt Newcastle would get the better of them, and it was a frustration, but a fantastic trip, brilliant trip over to Dortmund, and looking hopefully forward to more trips next season in the Conference League. We come back, John. We play Bournemouth away. And I don't know whether the Newcastle players had a hangover from the trip to Germany, but goodness me, what an absolute dire performance that was. Bournemouth totally outplaying Newcastle, and Newcastle deserved absolutely nothing from that game, and they got absolutely nothing from it.
Yeah, I mean, it was just reflective of our waveform, was it not, Andrew? I mean, the
Yeah,
waveform all season, we lost what 11 games on the road in the Premier League last season, I think, and having been brilliant on the road the season before when we finished fourth top, and you've got a mountain of games that you can away from home where you say, what on earth did we do? I mean, off the top of the head, without thinking about it, when we lost 3 at Everton, when we lost 2 at Bournemouth, we went to Luton and lost. I mean, we've had some awful away results this season, and this was one of them. And it went on for the full season. And even when we end with a great bit of if splendour by beating Brentford to make certain we finish seventh, we're 3-0 up at half time. We still let 2 goals in the second half in 4-2. I mean, that typified what we've been like away from home. While we have scored a pile of goals all season, and that's something I touched on at the beginning of this podcast, we have let in goals left, right, and centre as well. And yes, not having Pope has not been a help, and we've had injuries to Botman, etc., etc. But a lot of players have been around who were in that good defensive side the previous season, like Byrne and like Trippier for a lot of the time, like Shaw for a lot of the time. And yet, look at the difference. I mean, we have a major problem at the back. We want a centre forward, but by Jove, we've got a major problem at the back. And that's why I'm delighted that it looks as if 2 of our first signings this summer will be 2 free transfer centre halves who are good players. The kid at Fulham and Eddie's old player at Bournemouth.
yeah.
Thank goodness that we're looking at that situation, and not just because of Botman and Lascelles' injury, but we are not good defensively. And here was an example of it, in an example of our waveform. That day at Bournemouth typified several things we saw repeated time and again away from home throughout the season.
And of course, obviously, the caveat to that result was Newcastle were just getting decimated by injuries. I mean, it was Lewis Miley's first outing for Newcastle, and he actually was the best player on the park, I felt. But you had Gordon up front, Joe Linton out on the left, so they were missing Isaac, they were missing Wilson. Bruno was suspended. You then in game had Almiron who had to come off after, I think it was let me just check here. It was hasn't got it written down, but he came off because he was injured. Share and Longstaff also picked up injuries but managed to continue. You had had Lewis Hall starting. You had Lascelles at the back with Share. So people listening will say, "Well, yeah, they performed badly, but this is really the time that the injuries were starting to take hold."
Yeah, they probably will. But if it's no good hiding behind. You put up the umbrella in case it might start raining, and you can't hide behind excuses, because if you do, then you're not going to go forward. You're not going to go further. You've got to if you're good enough to be a Champions League side, and that's what we've been this season. We've been a Champions League side. Then you've got to have the ability for players to come in and do well. And in lots of cases, we have had that. I mean, Livramento's come in and looked very good. Hall at the end of the season, has come in and looked very good. Miley played about 17 games off the top of my head for us, which is sensational for a 17-year-old, but did terrific. And there's people that's come in and helped the situation. But you've got to have a strong squad. And we haven't had a strong squad. And when Eddie was talking, because in fairness to Eddie, he's always repeated throughout the season about not making injuries excuses for Newcastle's form. And he's also talked, even after the game when we won at Brentford on the last day to confirm seventh, we let in 2. he said, we aren't good enough defensively. We've got to look at the mentality of this side. And that is the realism of the situation. And I'm delighted, and I'm not being pessimistic, I'm delighted to hear Eddie say things like that, because we have to make a step forward. You know, we used to be grateful, didn't we? In the days of Ashley and Bruce, and we used to be grateful and say, ah, yes, but at least we're finished mid-table or whatever. We're more ambitious than that now. And we are at top offside. We've just finished seventh with all the drawbacks of the injuries that we've talked about. And by the way, what we will never know until next season how much we miss Tonali, because we don't know yet how good he is. But he was £52 million. Now that's big hitting for us. I mean, you know, what if we had 60 million for Isaac, and it's bigger than the Tonali fee? He is massive. Now, whether he was going to settle in and be a regular six or a regular eight, whether he was going to be attacking midfielder or a defensive shield, we're not certain. He can play both. We'll find out not next season where he's going to be groomed. But if you've got a £52 million signing and he disappears for 10 months, what a blow that is. I mean, yes, after the game against Villa, he didn't show the sort of form or consistency that we wanted. And I remember, Andrew, and I'm certain you do, that when he gave this peculiar press conference in Milan for the return in the Champions League, when all he seemed to talk about is how much he missed Milan and what a wonderful time he'd had there and what this city meant to him, etc., was certainly not what Geordies wanted to hear from the £52 million man. It looked as if he had come to us reluctantly because Milan had to sell because they needed the money. The cynics would say they knew what was coming with the ban. We don't know that whatsoever to be true. But cynics would suggest that. But I'm hoping that out of all this, Sandro's mind will have been cleared. He'll have learnt a lot more English. He'll appreciate the club has been superb to him, and we'll see the wonderful player that he unquestionably is next season. But we talk about the injuries impact. You sign a £52 million player, and before a blink of an eye, he's out for 10 months, not because of injury, because of a ban. He's got to be a massive loss. Whatever we thought we had bought, we lost.
Yeah, and he was banned in October, so that has slipped our minds. He was banned in October, which was a huge blow. But I'm really looking forward to seeing him back come August of next season. Now, after the Bournemouth game was Chelsea at home, and Newcastle won 4-1. Really important game. Another fantastic night that was. And the goals came from Jamal Lascelles, Joe Linton, Anthony Gordon, with the second half goals. Alexander Isak, back from injury, grabbed the opener. Attacking wise, it was a very good performance. Still a few issues. Defensively, Lascelles made a mistake, so it was really important that he got one of the goals that handed Newcastle the victory. It just reaffirmed, John, I guess, that even with injuries, Newcastle were going to be a force to be reckoned with at home.
Oh, yes, the home form. Yes, we went through a little blip over the full season, didn't we? When I think we drew with Luton, we'll be coming to it after the new year. We drew Luton 4-4 and lost with Forest 3-1, drew at home with Bournemouth. I think we had a little blip. But in the main, our home form was absolutely excellent, and is the reason why we finished seventh, and is the reason why we might yet be in Europe next season, because of our home form. As good as our home form was, our away form was bad. But at St James's Park, we've been terrific, and we've scored a pile of goals, and that has been the wonderful thing. We've scored 4 and 5s quite regularly, and we got 4 against Chelsea that day there way on when we won 4-1. We didn't know what Chelsea were going to become, which was an irritation to us, like knocking us out when under incredible circumstances in the League Cup with a terrible mistake right at the death. And then, of course, out of nowhere, charging up the the league table at the end of the season, and to finish above us in the table. Haven't been nowhere, and they end up finishing above us in the table, nicking the Europa League place, and did so brilliantly that they got rid of their manager. I mean, what sort of club are they? Like, you win, you lose 1 out of 16 or something at the end. You finish with 5 successive results. You climb into a European place against all the odds, and the owner then takes him out for dinner and doesn't thank him and make plans for next season. Just takes him out for dinner. I don't know if he talked about Disneyland or where they were going for their summer holidays, but he didn't do anything. And 3 days later, the co-owner gets rid. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. I'm delighted that they've got rid, because Chelsea might revert to being Chelsea next season, which will be terrific for us.
It certainly would be. The next game in the November calendar was PSG in Paris. Isaac puts Newcastle United ahead. Newcastle perform really well. They defend with courage. I think they do have 1 or 2 chances to maybe add, but largely, PSG are trying to push them. They just can't find a way through. There's some cracking saves, some clearances off the line, and it was always going to take what happened for Newcastle United not to win that game. The ball's in the box. It bounces off Team Livramento. Somehow it's awarded as a penalty after looking at it via VAR. Absolutely scandalous decision. I mean, we've covered it, John. We don't need to go into depth about it, but it's still one of those results which just angers me.
Yeah, I mean, it's all what might have been as far as the Champions League's concerned, because you've talked about Dortmund at home, Dortmund away. This was an extra 2 points. No doubt AC Milan will be coming up any second now at home, and we talk about what a missed opportunity that was. We could have finished second in the league, and instead we finished bottom. And it was all small margins, and that was a real killer at Paris Saint-Germain. There's no question about that. And of course, the implications if we'd won that, and that, would Paris Saint-Germain have gone on and been in the semi-final of the Champions League? I don't think they would have been. They probably wouldn't have qualified if we'd won in Paris. So, it was small margins, but hey-ho.
It certainly was, and something to learn from, I guess. I mean, not that Newcastle could have affected that, given it was a VAR mistake. But we've talked about November and the games kind of in isolation, but it's important probably to look at the just to talk about the fixtures that they did play there, because I mean they did play quite a few top teams, to say the least. Arsenal, Dortmund, Chelsea, but it was a very difficult kind of couple of months for Newcastle, but they came out all right with it. That victory over Chelsea, I think, left them 4 points off the top 4. So not a bad place to be given the injuries. Into December we go, and this is when the bad form really starts, I would say, John. I mean, you've got a great result, though, against Manchester United at home, one of the most one-sided games you'll see, but it came at the cost of Nick Pope getting injured, and then things really start to derail. But we talk about kind of Newcastle dominating. We talk about the games in which you'll remember, and I think that Man United game was probably one that you will remember for a long time because of just how good Newcastle United were. They just would like 10 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times better than Manchester United, and really the game should have ended 3 or 4-0, really.
And don't we like beating Manchester United?
Oh, we do.
I mean, me in particular, because again, being long in the tooth. I mean, I go back to the entertainers when I was very much involved in the John Hall Magpie Group, and we blew a 12-point lead. I'm sick to death of Manchester United. We were 12 points ahead of them, and then we blow it, and we finished second. We finished runners-up to Manchester United. They nicked the title off when we could have had our first English champions since 1927, for goodness sake. The next year, we're not so good, but we finished runners-up. Who to? Manchester United. Then we go and play. Then we get new owners, everything, etc., etc. and we play last season. We make the cup final. What happens just before the cup final? Pope gets sent off and can't play in the cup final against Manchester United. Well, cover goalkeeper Dubrovka can't play because he's cup tied. How's he cup tied? Because he played for Manchester United. I mean, everything seemed to be Manchester United, but we came away after that League Cup at Wembley and we beat them that season. We beat them this season 3-0 to knock them out at their place, and then we won this one 1-0. Yes, we're going to go on to eventually mention what happened down at Old Trafford much more recently. And now, who stands between us and our dreams? Could it be Manchester United? Oh, yes, Manchester United in the FA Cup final on Saturday. I'm sick to death of them. I am a Blues fan. Come on, you Blues. Come on, Pep. Holland, you get the business done, my son. Love you to death. Let's just go by the rule book. I mean, I'm haunted by the fact that Wigan beat Manchester City in the FA Cup final a few years back. So anything can happen in a two-horse race. But surely Man City are way, way above the class of Man United. And Man United can't tuck us up yet again. That was a great victory. It was much more than 1-0 on the way we played. And it took us up to fifth, which made us look good. But as you said, then December took a distinct turn for the worse.
I mean, the Nick Pope injury is probably the biggest talking point
Massive.
from December.
Massive.
And we felt the effects all the way along. I mean, you talked about the Man United defeat at Old Trafford just earlier this month. I would say at least two, if not all three of those goals don't go in if Nick Pope's in the back of the net or on the line just to save them. And he has been a huge, huge loss. We saw against Brentford. Okay, he made a mistake for he made a mistake in against Tottenham. Sorry, in Australia. So we don't need to talk about that. Sorry, against Brentford though, he made one or two really crucial saves, didn't he? And we can see how good he is. So to lose him from December to May, massive.
Oh, shattering. Absolutely. And if you remember it, Andrew, it was so innocuous. I mean, he just seemed to go down in three stages. You know, when you fell a large chimney and it suddenly just slowly goes down like that. He went down like that for a ball, and he didn't crash onto his shoulder or anything. He seemed to go down slow. It was innocuous, and then he gets up and the shoulder's gone and it's obvious gone. Now that's one of the worst injuries possible for a goalkeeper, obviously. A lot more than for Murphy, because you've fallen onto your shoulders all the time. So it's really got to be strong and got to be okay. And that was just unbelievable. And it cost us dearly. You know, if everything's if, we've been talking about if, and we've been talking about what if during the Champions League. But you know, if Joe Linton hadn't gone, if Pope hadn't gone, if Botman hadn't gone for such long periods, we could have been challenging for the Champions League again this season and could have been in the position Aston Villa have just finished in quite easily. But you can't live on ifs. You know, if the goal was a foot high, several shots would have gone under the bar. You can go on forever like that. But yes, we have been very unlucky. All the injuries we got never seem to be 2-game injuries. They seem to be 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. I mean, quite incredible. And Pope is arguably one of the biggest, probably him and Joe Linton, but possibly because of the position he plays, etc. Pope was the most influential injury I think that we had.
No, yeah, I totally agree with you. Then you've got Newcastle beating at Everton, absolutely awful. Because you look at the game against Manchester United, thinking we're gonna do something here. They go down to Everton, who are in just an absolute chaotic mess, and Everton tactically better. Newcastle just not up for it. Anthony Gordon looked overawed by it. He was substituted. He'd been Newcastle's main man, but he just looked like the occasion got the better of him. Kieran Trippier, 2 mistakes, and Newcastle are punished for it. I mean, this is a very bad month for Kieran Trippier, really, isn't it? Because you've got the Chelsea game in the cup coming up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he was such a wonderful, wonderful signing for us when he first came, because he was a superstar name. He was coming into a relegation fight. He just won La Liga against all the odds, topping Real Madrid and Barcelona, and he committed himself to Newcastle. And he set the pattern. And so did Bruno, in fairness, immediately after him. They set the pattern and were wonderful signings. But has he just been unlucky? Has it been a dip in form? Or is old Father Time catching up with him? He's 33-year-old now, and he's got a very, very good young buck in Livramento breathing down his neck for next season. Is Kieran at the stage where he's not automatic choice? Not when you've got somebody like Livramento there. He's not automatic choice now. And this was the start of a bad month for him. And of course, the most amazing part of the bad month was Chelsea winning the League Cup. Uh, when his howler, oh dear, 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 right at the death with the game already won, turned it on its head, made it 1-1, made it go to penalties, out we go, Chelsea march on. Bad, bad days.
Yeah, and I mean, in between that, we've got the 4-1 defeat to Spurs. Spurs had lost 4 of the last 5.
Yep.
Upturn Newcastle United and give them 3 points. Another shocking performance from Newcastle. We then have Newcastle versus Fulham as well. Newcastle win 3-0. Fulham down to 10 men very early on after Raul Jimenez had karate kicked Sean Longstaff, and Newcastle took advantage of it. And I mean, there were moments in that game. Fulham, even with 10 men, looked dangerous. Iwobi was a particular nuisance, but Newcastle thankfully got the win. Their only win in the league in December. And I mean, when you look back, John, that's a really important victory, isn't it? Because I mean, if they'd gone December without a victory in the league, things would have
Oh,
looked a lot more gloomy.
oh, it was an important victory, but rather than give them credit for that one important victory, you want to look at some of the defeats we had in December. If we'd avoided them, and got them wins instead of defeats. And I'm thinking of Luton away and Forest at home. Um, we could have been going for the Champions League. We had a very, very bad month.
Yeah, I don't think that's in doubt at all. I mean, you look at the league table as it's finished, just 9 points off Aston Villa in 4th, and you do look at results. Yeah, Everton, Luton, and Forest in December. I know Newcastle got injuries and they've had European football, but on paper, 3 teams battling for safety. Newcastle should be beating them. Obviously, everything's kind of gone against Newcastle. Obviously, after that Spurs game, John, in between Spurs and Fulham, you've had the game against AC Milan. And I talked earlier in the show about Newcastle really showing a lack of discipline and organisation at times. And it was kind of there. And it goes back to what you were saying about a lack of know-how, a bit of naivety being on show. At one point, Newcastle United were leading against AC Milan. Europa League is what they've got sewn up. And they still went ahead. And I know people are like,
But
well,
when we're leading through Joe Linton, Andrew, we
great
were
goal.
the result that was happening the other. We were Champions League qualifiers.
Hmm.
We were qualifying in second position. So we are leading after 33 minutes, and we're in the knockout stage of the Champions League. They equalise in 59, but we're in the Europa League.
Yeah, just and
We're
just
in the
think.
Europa League. And
Ex-
then we lose.
so frustrating because I mean there was one point at that 1-1, and I remember Fabian Schär kind of marauding forward and then
Yeah.
losing the ball, and it's just like, where's the game management? Like,
He lost the ball in their penalty area.
yeah,
You're wondering why we've got qualification tied up, and our centre halves losing the ball in their penalty area, and they break on us and boom. Now, do we go back to naivety again in old hands like AC Milan just managed to get it's not having to go at Newcastle or building AC Milan up bigger than they were because they were a very average side, but they've got a little bit of nous about them. And we went during that 90 minutes from being qualifiers for the knockout stage of the Champions League to not even being in the Europa Cup, which was quite quite staggering and very, very naive in our own fault. And it was in, as you say, in a very, very bad month.
Yeah, I'm very frustrated still at that AC Milan game because I think Newcastle should have just managed it a lot better. Take the Europa League place, continue in a competition, which you're going to have more chance of winning. Of course, ideally, you want Champions League progression, but just throw it away in the manner they did. It just showed a proper lack of naivety, a lack of leadership. And I actually think people left the stadium very angry and very
Of
downhearted
course.
about it because Newcastle threw it away. But as you've said, John, it's all a learning curve, isn't it? And they'll take these experiences into next season. They go to Luton, terrible performance,
Oh,
proper lack of fight. Luton blew them away. It should have been 3 or 4 to Luton. Ross Barkley, I mean, goodness me, he could have set up his front room amongst Newcastle's midfield and still had time to go and cook his dinner. Like, they were nowhere near him. He played absolutely brilliant. They made him look like Peter Beardsley or Messi with the ball. It was an absolute joke of a performance by Newcastle United. And then to cap off December, to finish the year, Nottingham Forest at home at St James's Park, 3-1. Poor Dan Burn turned inside out. And I think, John, this is where Eddie Howe really started to face constant questions because
of course.
it was Dan Burn and he'd had bad games leading up to this game. And there was a lot of calls. I think me and you on the preview said it, drop him out of this team because if he goes up against the Langer, he's going to get turned inside out. And what happened? And it was really probably, I think, Eddie Howe's toughest moment because he had to take a lot of the flack for it, and he stuck by Dan Burn, and it's worked out all right. Thankfully, he's gone into centre back where he looks a much better player. But some dodgy, I think, some very questionable selection decisions in December, and it kind of epitomised it by that performance against Forest.
Oh, yes. I mean, and we're not going to go into the Dan Burn situation because we've been shouting about it all season. But he's not a left back; he's a centre half, and he plays left back like a centre half. And I actually ended up feeling sorry for him because he wasn't picking himself at left back; the manager was. And when he moved back to centre half because of Botman's injury, I can bet my bottom dollar in Dan's house he went, whew, thank goodness for
I
that.
don't know, John. He really likes playing left back. He really thinks he can play left back.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think he's gone on record to say that's kind of his favourite position, even though he just looks.
No, he didn't say it was his favourite position. He said
I'm
centre
sure
half
he
was
has,
his
you know. I mean, I'm
favourite
sorry,
position.
Dan, if you're listening. I might be
No,
wrong.
he has.
I'm
He
sure
hasn't
he
said
said
it's his
that.
favourite position. He says I'm a centre half, but I'm willing to play anyway for the team. He, he would want shooting as well as a manager if it was his favourite position, left back, because he plays it like Jack Charlton. And I'm delighted for him that he's gone back to centre half and shown all the attributes that he's got, which is his height, his power in the air, his ability to tackle, his willingness. He's such a good lad. He wants it to happen. He's such a joy. He wants it to happen for this club. But he's in his right position. Please don't play him left back anymore. Because if you play him left back next season, we'll be way like we are talking here. We'll be talking about the defence leaking goals, etc., etc. But hopefully, with Hall available and playing well, which he did at the end of the season, that'll take care of left back, and Livramento can take care of left back as well if need be. And Hall needs cover. But if we put Dan Burn back out there, we won't make progress. And and I'm a firm believer in that, and I'm delighted for what he's done when he moved in. But yes, that day against Forest, 3-1 at home, we were 1-0 up, we're cruising, just coming up to half time till they equalised, we were cruising, and then we're taken apart. And who takes us apart? Chris Wood, who is marginally faster than the steamroller going uphill, and he gets a hat trick, which is more Premier League goals. This is an interesting thing. At St James's Park, he scored more Premier League goals for Nottingham Forest than for Newcastle United. Do you know that? In that,
I know
he never
you've mentioned
managed
it
three
before, but
Premier League goals for Newcastle at St James's Park. So he scored more in one afternoon for them than he did in the whole of his time for Newcastle United.
Yeah, it was a performance and a half from Chris Wood, who has, like I mentioned at the start, 14 goals this season. Yeah, I found the quote from Dan Burn, so I'll just correct myself. He said, I think my strongest position is centre back. It's the position I've played
Thank
since I
you.
was a kid, and I feel most comfortable there. But I'd probably say, in contrast to that, the majority of the Premier League games have been at left back, and managers continue to pick me to play at left back. I know I can play there, and I do enjoy playing there. So, got a little bit mixed up. But he said he enjoys playing there, but obviously, as said, thankfully, that centre back is his preferred position. Finished the year, John, in 9th in the league, out of the League Cup, out of the Champions League. You were heading into 2024. What were you thinking? Just sum up the first half of the season.
I was thinking I have had so much that I adore, like Champions League football for Newcastle, like Paris Saint-Germain at home, like home results against Aston Villa, Arsenal, and Manchester United. Hasn't that been wonderful? But I'm going into meeting Father Christmas in Phoenix window absolutely battered by the December that I've had. And I'm thinking Luton away and Forest at home, Everton away. Can it get any worse than this? And, I know it's December and Father Christmas comes bearing gifts, but that doesn't mean Newcastle United have got to come bearing gifts for the opposition. And we were doing that regularly. It was such an up and down season. I honestly thought, what's going to happen in the second half of the season? What is going to happen? And you know what? I had no idea. And I don't think any of us did. And I wouldn't be surprised if Eddie Howe didn't deep down inside in a private moment, because are we going to turn up like we did against Aston Villa at home and like we did against Paris Saint-Germain at home? Or are we going to turn up like we did at Everton and at Luton and at home to Forest? Who knows? This is the sort of season we've had. It's been up and down, unpredictable the whole time. The previous season was steady away on an upward curve. Wonderful. Don't we like that? This was crazy. This was absolutely crazy. At this time of the year, I was sitting and thinking, I've had some wonderful days, but I've had some absolute horrors as well. And I can't believe that basically this is the same side that has produced both of those things.
Yeah, and then we were heading into 2024, which we will cover in part 2 of our season review. Thank you very much for joining us. Hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. If you're listening on the audio channel, thank you as always. Leave us a rating and review. It's been a bit of a long one, but we hope you guys have enjoyed it. Me and John certainly have. Check back on Saturday for part 2 of the Newcastle United season review 2023-2024 from the Everything is Black and White podcast. We'll see you guys then.